Nina, can you hear us?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And hopefully your screen share capabilities are working for you. You seeing the button down there?
Yeah, I have to get my slides up first.
Yeah, why don't you just start doing that? You know, I think that we're starting with the right person. For anyone who's involved in this community, in aphasia care and whatnot, you know Nina. You've read her books. It's probably one of the first ones you read as you got involved and wanted to learn more and all of that. I also have the thrill of calling her the first president of Aphasia Access and back as a board member. There are people who an introduction probably does not do justice by them. And for what Nina has done for the aphasia community and for Aphasia Access and whatnot, I can't do it justice in words. So I think I'm supposed to stop talking now and just thank you for kicking us off, and hope everyone enjoys hearing from Nina.
Well, thanks, Todd. I'm really excited about the day. I am a little terrified about being the first speaker. And in fact, Aura Kagan, my dear friend, texted me a little while ago and said, break a leg, which of course is theater speak for good luck. But I've been laughing about it ever since because I actually do have a broken leg. So this should go very well. I wanted to talk about looking towards the future relative to the state of aphasia. And I thought these two quotes were particularly relevant to kind of set a context. The first one by Neil Armstrong: science has not yet mastered prophecy. We predict too much for the next year and yet far too little for the next 10. And another quote: the ultimate function of prophecy is not to tell the future, but to make it. And so this really speaks to what I wanted to address this morning, and that is not necessarily me predicting the future, but talking about how we all probably have visions for the future and how we might get there. So my question to you is, do you have a vision for aphasia services in the next 20 years? And how do you or us as a community move from our vision or aspiration to action? In other words, how do we create change? And that really got me thinking about what I would want to see happen in aphasia rehabilitation in the next 10 or 20 years. And of course, having kind of loose mental associations as I do, I thought of Dr. Seuss. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Seuss. But if I ran the zoo, said young Gerald McGrew, I'd make a few changes. That's just what I'd do. And to paraphrase, with apologies to Dr. Seuss, I came up with this: if I ran what we do, says old Nina Mackie, I'd make a few changes. That's just what I'd do. But change is not easy. It isn't about a quick fix or a one-off research study. We can't launch in and do a small study and then pull out and move on to something else. If we want to impact change, we need to be in it for the long haul. We need to understand the issues, because we can have unexpected consequences if we don't fully understand what the issues are, what the problems are, what our goals are. And so let's review the requirements for change. These are some criteria that impact whether or not change will occur in any area, really. The first is motivation and inspiration, identifying and understanding problems, targeting clear goals, challenging standard approaches or the status quo, and having courage and commitment. And what I'd like to do is use two examples to walk through the change requirements. And these are examples that I'm passionate about, but I would encourage you to think about examples of things you would like to see change in and how we can effectively go through the change process. And the first one comes from the white paper on the state of aphasia that Aphasia Access published in 2018. And this is one of the 10 key recommendations, and that is to build knowledge and awareness of aphasia. And of course, the first change requirement is motivation and inspiration to create change. And of course, it's appropriate because why do we have Aphasia Awareness Month at all? Because most of us, if not all of us, believe that the world would be a better place for people living with aphasia if others understood aphasia. And so is this something that you wish for? Is this something that you're passionate about? Is this something that you believe is a priority? I certainly do. Also, change requires clearly identifying and understanding the problem or the problems with the issue. So we've already identified that there's a problem. Surveys around the world report poor public awareness and knowledge of aphasia. So just generalizing across 20 countries, only 27% of the general public has even heard the word aphasia. And across those countries, only 7% of the public has even a minimal knowledge of what aphasia is. So we've identified the problem. Aphasia awareness is poor. Also, we've identified that awareness has not improved over time. So for example, in 2002, a public survey in England showed only about 5% basic knowledge of aphasia. 16 years later, still only 5% basic knowledge of aphasia in a 2018 public survey in England. And the same thing goes for the US. In 2002, there was about 5.4% basic knowledge of aphasia. In 2016, 8.8% basic knowledge of aphasia in a public survey by the National Aphasia Association. And just this year, the NAA has given the results of another public survey that shows 7% basic knowledge of aphasia. So even though the percentages are slightly different, I would suggest that they're probably within the margin of error. And so no appreciable change over time in the public awareness of aphasia. We also want to understand why aphasia awareness hasn't changed over these long periods of time, even though groups and organizations have spent time and resources to implement campaigns to improve public awareness of aphasia. So that was the question that this group addressed. We wanted to know, why aren't aphasia awareness campaigns making an impact? What's going wrong? We needed to understand the problem in more depth. And so we reviewed the literature, we looked at websites, we looked at existing campaigns, and we published this paper, which basically came up with this list of potential problems for existing aphasia awareness campaigns. And I'm not going to read them off here because I'm going to go through each one and talk about them briefly. First of all, one potential problem is the lack of a clear, compelling, and unified message across campaigns or across efforts. So for example, some campaigns talk about what aphasia is. Others talk about what aphasia is not. Some talk about how many people have aphasia, trying to impress that it's a large group of people. Others talk about methods to help people communicate better. Another potential problem for aphasia public awareness campaigns is that there's no memorable tagline or slogan. So people that aren't familiar with aphasia need something that's clear, that sticks in their memory so that they can call it up later so that it's memorable. And if you think about these taglines, how many of y'all know the source of "A Diamond is Forever"? De Beers, who markets diamonds, or "Melts in Your Mouth, Not in Your Hands." M&M's, that's a widely known slogan. Or what about a recent one, "Black Lives Matter"? Who doesn't understand what that means and remember it? It's highly memorable, has a great depth of meaning. So we don't have anything like that for aphasia. We also tend to target audiences that are already familiar with aphasia. So we use email lists, we use social media sites that are accessed by our friends and colleagues or people with aphasia that already know what aphasia is, but the general public probably doesn't access those sources. And a momentary topic shift, because what I'm talking about is public awareness of aphasia. So is the teach-in a mistake? No, the goal of the teach-in differs. It's to increase our awareness of what's going on in the world of aphasia, to bring together the professional community to understand the progress that's being made, new ideas, and talk about issues in aphasia. So again, I'm talking about getting the word out to the general public. Another potential problem that our group identified is that many campaigns are not based on research on what works. So there's a huge literature out there from marketing, from health promotion, from general communication research about methods of getting across ideas at changing attitudes about health conditions, or getting across ideas about implementing some sort of health change. And so we haven't really accessed that literature. Also, we tend to approach the problem in silos. So different organizations have different aims, different messages, different audiences. And then finally, there's really little evidence that the impact of campaigns has been evaluated. So we have lots of statistics about just broad surveys of aphasia awareness in the public, but we haven't looked at the specific effectiveness of methods or messages, or what audiences have been impacted by particular campaigns. And again, there's a wide literature out there on methods of evaluating things like health promotion campaigns. The third criteria for change is targeting clear and well-defined goals. So the goal has been generally build public awareness, but I don't think there's been any consensus on awareness of what specifically, or why. What's the outcome that we want to achieve? What do we want people to know or to do in response to these campaigns? And who is the public? Is it young people? Is it elderly people? Is it everybody? Is it a certain segment of vulnerable people in the population? And how do we build public awareness? So our goal has been too broad and ill-defined, we would suggest. So here's an example of something that we might identify as a change target. Identify a clear, compelling, and unified message for aphasia awareness campaigns. So this isn't necessarily a goal for aphasia awareness, it's a goal for how we get there. And I'm happy to announce that there's a group working on that. This is a multinational project that's designed to identify the message that we should be getting across. The questions of interest for this project group are: what key outcomes do stakeholders want from aphasia awareness campaigns? Who is the target audience, or who are the target audiences if they're more than one? And what are the message priorities? And we're doing that by conducting focus groups around the world with people with aphasia, care partners, aphasia service providers, aphasia researchers, and the purpose is to identify what they see as the desired outcomes and what the message priorities are. And those data, which will probably be substantial in quantity, will be analyzed by identifying recurring themes and recurring messages, identifying potential target audiences, and then working to gain an international consensus on key messages. So it's a big, probably fairly long-term project, but it's really important if we're going to move ahead with a unified, compelling message for aphasia awareness campaign. Another aspect of change requires challenging standard approaches. So for example, in moving forward with increasing public awareness of aphasia, one way to challenge standard approaches is to stop going it alone. In other words, organizations tend to compete for recognition or resources or whatever the goals of the particular group are. And instead, we need to join together across organizations, across stakeholder groups, across countries, much like this teach-in has done, where organizations have come together to really promote the goals of the teach-in. We also need to call in the experts. It's not just about doing campaigns, it's about doing them right. And so it's important to recognize that we don't have the skills or the knowledge, or at least I know I don't, to create impactful campaigns. So looking for people that can assist with that, health promotions experts, marketing experts, and so forth. And finally, having courage and commitment. So we need to be committed to change. So what are you willing to do to create change in the public awareness of aphasia? Is this something that you're passionate about? You could run a focus group to identify messages as part of the project that I just described to you. You can identify an additional goal and recruit a project group to identify that aspect of the problem. You could, on the big scale, serve as the convener to organize international change in public awareness. And I'm sure you all have some other ideas for how we might move forward through the process of making change in this area. Okay, let me move to another example of an area that I really feel passionate about and feel that change is needed. And again, this comes from one of the 10 critical recommendations in the Aphasia Access White Paper. And that is to promote programs designed to prevent social isolation. So starting with motivation and inspiration, where should we get our motivation from? Well, first of all, I think for me, hearing the experiences of people with aphasia is extremely powerful. This is a quote from Susie Parr's work where a care partner has said, if he sees somebody he used to work with, he'll look at them and they'll walk away. They can't cope with it, you know, they walk away. Or here's a quote from a person with aphasia from Kyla Brown and colleagues' work. When you can't talk and when you've had a stroke, you lose a lot of your friends and the person's crying silently. These are really powerful, and I don't think anyone that has a heart doesn't feel that this situation needs to change for people with aphasia, that the loss of friends, social isolation is a true area that's important. Also, we have motivation from research findings. So findings across groups shows that social isolation and loneliness have a whole constellation of negative consequences, all the way from lower general well-being to the extremes of higher rates of premature death. So social isolation is really a powerful health issue, not just a sad situation. Change requires identifying and understanding the problems. And we've done that in identifying the problem in aphasia research. So research on social networks and friendships suggests that aphasia is associated with reduced social contacts, that loss of friends is widespread in aphasia, that loneliness and loss of friends is a big concern for people living with aphasia. So there is a problem out there. We also have information that helps us understand the problem a little more, and that relates to why people with aphasia lose their friends. And of course, obviously, difficulty communicating is a big one, because communication is integral to the experience of friendship. Friendship is often based on communication. But there are other reasons also that play into this. For example, friends often don't understand aphasia. So we've seen reports of friends feeling embarrassed around the person with aphasia, or feeling that they're going to cause another stroke if they try to talk to the person with aphasia. Also, loss of shared activities. So if friendship is based on going golfing together and the person with aphasia no longer plays golf, then those golf buddies may be lost. Loss of shared characteristics. So things like enjoying reading and talking about favorite books, or mobility, or energy levels, or characteristics that people often share. And finally, reduced proximity or access to one another. So people with aphasia may not be able to get to the places where their friends are. And we know that friendship is complicated. It's not the same for everybody. So we need to understand more about what helps people with aphasia or individuals maintain existing friends or make new friends, and what kind of interventions might help foster friendship in aphasia. So we could pull from the aging literature where they've tried to address social isolation in the elderly through a variety of methods, befriending programs, community groups, technology, specific activity groups, cognitive behavioral therapies. So these might be something that would be applicable in aphasia. But we need to be clear on the goals, what the specific goal is for making change in this area. And I think this is sort of general points, that the idea of beginning with the end in mind, which Aura and I have talked about a lot. And I love this quote: "The farmer, attempting to plow straight furrows, selects a point in the distance and then constantly aims in that direction." So basically that means that change works best when everyone's sight is fixed on the same goal. And that's why defining our focal point is so important when we're launching into some sort of change initiative. The focal point that I'm addressing right now is fostering friendships in aphasia. And so again, change initiatives work best when our sights are fixed on the same goal. But that doesn't mean that we have to use the same methods, whatever the therapy method. So whether it's language intervention or communication partner training or some specific intervention related to friendship or teaching strategies, whatever, the intervention has to bridge to the meaningful life outcome goal. That means we have to assess that life outcome goal. We have to be clear what that end goal is, and we have to know how we get there, and we have to know if we've achieved it, or if we're even going in the right direction. So aphasia management will include fostering friendships for people with aphasia, to maintain existing friendships, and or to foster new friendships. That's a goal. And in that vein, this group that you see pictured here wants to work on maintaining existing friendships. So we've started a project aimed at preventing loss of friends in aphasia. And this will involve identifying key factors in maintaining existing friendships, creating a program to increase facilitators and decrease barriers to friendship maintenance, and then implementing a clinical trial to determine the impact of the program. So again, clearly defining the goal and that focal point at the end, which is decreasing social isolation. Another project that's going on right now is the Superb trial in the UK, which is aimed at fostering new friendships. And this trial is being led by Katerina Hilary, who is going to talk about it tomorrow morning in this teach-in at 8:30 Eastern Time. So in this project, stroke survivors with long-term aphasia are being trained to be peer befrienders of people with recent onset of aphasia. So if you're interested in the changes that this might provoke, listen in to Katerina tomorrow. Change requires challenging standard approaches. So I would like to suggest that language improvement is not the outcome goal of aphasia rehabilitation. I know for some of you this might be bizarre, but in fact, language improvement is a means to a big end. It's a means to getting at the important ultimate end goals. It should not be the goal of therapy entirely. In fact, the ultimate goal is meaningful life participation that contributes to well-being and quality of life. We know that communication pervades life situations, daily activities, relationships. So the role of the speech pathologist is to make sure that people with aphasia have the skills, the resources, and the support to participate in personally chosen life situations. That might mean improved language, it might mean learning strategies, it might mean having skilled partners, but we have to focus on what that focal point is. And one approach for the focal point of reducing social isolation is to improve friendships, which can provide opportunities for communication, impact mood, create a sense of community, contribute to well-being and quality of life. So, fostering friendships is within the scope of aphasia management practices. And I think while some of us believe that, it is probably a challenge to the status quo in general. The last change requirement is having courage and commitment. I think our team and others are committed to moving forward with research on improving friendship in aphasia and decreasing social isolation. So if you're thinking about changes that are important, that you view as needed, that you're passionate about, it sometimes seems overwhelming. Where do you start? And as I said to start with, change isn't easy, but it is possible. And I'd like to give you a brief review of my career, very brief. 40 years ago, working on functional communication therapy was a relatively new concept. And I was really all in at that time. But it was different. It's challenged the status quo of using base 10 forms to work on specific language processing. 30 years ago, functional was being questioned as too narrow, and ideas about the social approach and social models to aphasia began to emerge. 20 years ago, the life participation approach to aphasia was published, which certainly challenged the status quo. 10 years ago, the seeds of aphasia access were sowed. Now, clinical practice in aphasia has expanded significantly. If you saw what I did in aphasia therapy 40, 45 years ago, you would be quite surprised. It was very narrow. Now, many outstanding young researchers want to embrace important questions that speak to participation and to well-being. Now, aphasia access has become an active change agent. So in 10 years, yes, we can have significant changes. We just have to hang in there and work in a methodical, programmatic way. So what would you want to see happen in aphasia rehabilitation in the next 10 or 20 years? I really didn't want to just use this talk to talk about only what I want to see happen or what I anticipate happening, because that's not that important. It's what you are passionate about. So what to do, how to be a change agent? Well, we use those criteria that I talked about. Identify something that you feel passionate about changing. Make change a priority in your practice or in your research. Identify like-minded people within and across stakeholder groups. Look at what people like Carol Dow Richards have done, or the Adlers, in radically changing the way things have progressed, because they identified a problem. do what you can to manage change. It might be leadership, it might be inspiring others, it might be joining some change group, it might be following along, it might be helping provide funding, whatever. People have to decide for themselves how much they can take on. Working with others to create change from within. Nobody likes to have some expert come in and tell you what to do. Instead, we need to work with the people where change has to happen to see what needs to be done, how they could embrace change. And then finally, join organizations that are change agents, such as Aphasia Access. So I would like to end this talk on this note from Joel Barker, who's a motivational speaker. Vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. Vision with action can change the world. Okay, so Todd, do we have questions?
If we have questions, you can share them on the chat with the live stream. If you're on that page or on the Facebook page, we see a lot of things in the chat stream. A lot of folks saying how much they're enjoying seeing you, Nina, and grateful for you being here. You know, to your question of what folks would like to see, it's been interesting. We've seen a bunch of comments, including awareness and more support for caregivers came up to the question that you asked. I have two while we're looking to see if folks have questions. And the beauty of it is we've had our first seamless handoff because our next speaker is already in the waiting room ready to go. So this concept could work. I'm going to ask a bunch of folks for the next 24 hours if you have a favorite Aphasia Access memory.
Are you asking me that?
Yeah, that's your first question.
Oh, okay. Probably my favorite Aphasia Access memory is sitting in that room in Santa Fe, talking about whether there should be an Aphasia Access and just the power of the ideas. And Todd was leading as a facilitator, and we gave birth. It was so exciting.
And I appreciated your comment on the slide where you said that Aphasia Access is a change organization. So the official declaration that we are feels like birth happened and we've kind of moved through those first years out of kindergarten and working our way up a bit. So it does seem like the time is good in that regard. The other thing that we're going to ask everybody, in part because we're trying to find, you had so many nuggets, but we're trying to find a nugget. And I also promised the teaching committee that we would take some notes throughout the day so that they'd have something at 10:45 tomorrow morning when they have to recap 24 hours of talks. If there's one nugget, Nina, if there's one thing in everything, what's the one you don't want anybody to lose sight of?
From this talk?
Yeah, or go wherever you want. You're Nina.
I think from this talk, the biggest thing is that everybody is a change agent. And it doesn't have to be something big like publishing the life participation of aphasia 2030. But everybody is a change agent. Just figure out a way that you can contribute to change. There's lots of things in aphasia management that don't need changing, but always we can make things better. And I think if we listen to people with aphasia and we work with people with aphasia, then we know what some of those things are. So I guess that's the biggest point.
That makes absolute sense. A lot of sense. Well, Nina, we're grateful. I'm not allowed to be on a call without telling Nina to give my best to her dog, JJ. So I'm do it on the teach-in. Folks have just been hitting the chat boxes, just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm going to add one last thank you. We're thrilled to have you. And it was a great way to kick it off. A lot of things to get people thinking about. Thank you, friend.